I think every nation state in the area is concerned about what's happening in the region. We have no idea where these things are going to go. Nobody does. I wouldn't be surprised if Morocco was concerned, Saudi Arabia was concerned, and Iran was concerned as to what's going on in the region. So of course the Israelis are. But the Israelis' principal issue is the treaty which the U.S. arranged between Israel and Egypt. And that would be the one thing they'd be most worried about. Will the Gaza flank open up for a free flow from Egypt again under, say, a Muslim Brotherhood type government? That would be a very major thing for Israel. And that would destroy the American $1.3 billion military support.
And given this prognosis of yours, do you think there is any reason why the Israeli government should, well, assume a radically different stance vis-a-vis these events?
Well, I can't say what they're going to do. As you know, there's going to be some high-level talks on the Palestinian frontier with the Jordan in about a week. I guess it's been delayed 2 weeks. There are a number of issues that are out there, and I think the only thing we can say is it'll depend on how it shakes down, what position the Israelis take, and it could go from a continuation of the same to a heavily defended Gaza frontier.
Okay, to Gaza, to 80. Do you think, well, obviously you're in there amid the Palestinian people with all the hardship that they're suffering on a daily basis. Now, what is the feeling of the Palestinian side, given all that's happening throughout the broader Middle East region and among the other Arab nations? They're revolting, saying no to dictatorial regimes who were, by the way, being supported by the U.S. generally and oftentimes by the Israeli government. What's the public opinion?
Well, obviously, many of the public were very happy to see these enormous friends of Israel and America finally brought down. They were dictatorships. They were brutal to their own people, and obviously they were contributing towards the horrific siege and the bombings and the immunity that Israel has to commit all these crimes against the people in Gaza. There's still uncertainty about what's going to happen, of course, because no one can be exactly sure wherever we are in the world. And so, but ultimately, so many I've spoken to have said whatever is after Mubarak can't be a bigger friend of Israel after that. And the same is true to an extent for Ben Ali in Tunisia. And of course, we're keeping an eye on a lot of the other regimes as well. I think there was in some ways a bit of jealousy amongst Palestinians of seeing people get their freedom back. Palestinians have been waiting 60 years for liberty and for the same human rights as anybody else in the world. And they've only seen their situation worsen as the siege continues. So seeing so many people gaining back their rights and turning over the oppressive regime, they want to do that for Israel. And of course, it's not happening yet, but with a bit of luck and more Arab support and more international support, finally this could happen. I think there could be a sign of light at the end of the tunnel.
To you in London. Now, when I was speaking earlier to a number of other experts, if not panelists on previous shows, regarding what's happening in Libya, in Tunisia, and Egypt, they were saying that one of the reasons that most people in these Arab nations, not necessarily Muslims, but indeed the majority are Muslims, have been enraged about the policies pursued by their rulers, who were, by the way, dictators supported by the U.S., was their, loose and weak stance before Israel and their possible positions towards the Palestinian cause in occupied territories. Now, given this, do you think the same scenario, which these revolutions were basically called liberation movements by many of these people, do you think such a scenario, such a liberation movement could possibly realize in the occupied territories?
I mean, I think it's really important for us to remember that the greatest enemy for Israel is justice. And what Israel has been surrounding itself with for the last 62 years is with injustices, which she imposed, or Israel imposed, on the Palestinians by Israel itself, and the injustices imposed on the Arab nation who surround Palestine by their dictators and by the Western influence. And of course, these dictators are puppies which were provided to the Arab world by their own, compressed into nothing. And what's happening for the last 40 odd years, that this Arab generation that we had around the region, they were taught taught on a daily basis how to look hopeless, how to be completely with no energy, how to not know what is their energy and what is their beauty and their good and powerful sides. And they were all taught that Palestine exists miles and thousands of miles away from you. So Palestine suddenly, the closest country to them, being pictured using their own government's TV stations and policies as if it's something that happens out of our time zone. Now, with this liberation movement, the democracy movement, the revolution movement, you call them whatever you want, but basically it is, I think what's the people in Egypt and certainly in Libya and across the Arab world are doing now, they are revolutionizing the revolution. And what they're doing now, they are realizing their strength, and they're realizing that they're not hopeless people. They are people with a big history and big nation,
Osama,
and they've got one of their brothers and nations.
Strength. What is really, in your opinion, the strength of this movement?
The strength of this movement, basically, that we are, I mean, Israel and everybody knows that what's happening in Palestine is injustice, and no crazy person will accept injustice to happen on the doors.
The so-called liberation movements in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Libya, that caused people, motivated people to rise up against those dictatorial regimes. What is the strength of that movement, and could it be a possible inspiration to the people of Palestine?
Of course, no, the people of Palestine, are they going to get rid of their own dictators? And, you know, the Palestinian Authority, which is illegal for the last 10 years, will be thrown out. But unfortunately, in Palestine, we are going under a lot of challenges. You know, we have an internal conflict between Hamas and Fatah, which is completely nonsense, and we must get rid of that conflict soon. We have the Palestinian Authority, which is completely an expired project of the Palestinian liberation movement, the PLO, a siege which is embarked upon the Palestinian people. So in Palestine, we can't do it on our own. We need help from the Arab people, the Arab brothers, and also from the Muslim world and from the human people.
Let me throw your thoughts over to Ontario, to Mr. Corrigan. Mr. Corrigan, you were saying something. Go ahead.
I believe the Palestinians probably sparked some of this resistance because they've been standing steadfast against the occupation. They didn't buckle under the cruel Israeli attack in Gaza of a couple of years ago. Also, I think maybe the example of Hezbollah defeating the Israelis. So there's been a couple of sparks which have finally wakened the Arab populace, or the sleeping giant, as some people have described it. So I think that it is a game changer, and the collapse of the Tunisian regime, the collapse of the Egyptian regime, the refusal of Egyptian soldiers to fire on their own people, the fact that a lot of people are very worried about Saudi Arabia because it's probably the most unstable of all the regimes because of their rather bizarre succession system, and we're down, I think, to the last two sons of Ibn Saud, and they're probably looking at a civil war in Saudi Arabia in the very near future. But you're talking about people power, and this has shaken the Middle East, and certainly, I think, grabbed the attention of the West when the West says, we support democracy, but of course, in many cases, they don't. Hamas was elected democratically, but they didn't accept the results. There was a lot of complaints from the Western powers when democracy elected the wrong people from their perspective. But you have to allow the individual countries to decide who their leaders are. And I think you have to bring about the end of the humiliation of the Arabs, where they just sort of kowtow to the Americans, kowtow to the Israelis. And Israel, up until now, has not taken into account anything of the Arab states. It has launched its policies in total disregard to the Arab street. And now there's this frustration and this constant humiliation has been one of the forces building up against the corruption, against the autocratic regimes, against the feudal nature of the societies.
To New York, to Thomas Lipscomb.
Very much.
You were saying something? Go ahead.
Very much frustration.
Yes, I think it's important to realize that in Morocco, in Tunis, in Libya, in Egypt, in Bahrain, there hasn't been a single speaker or a sign that said anything about Palestine and Israel. If one country in the region needs to be afraid of this movement towards liberation, it's Iran. You have your two most popular leaders in house arrest, and Rafsanjani
I know
just
you really
down.
do feel the urge to take advantage of this opportunity.
Unstabilized.
I appreciate that. It's very, intelligent of you, but since we don't have the luxury of excessive time to accord you, I'm afraid I have to stop you there. Please, why don't you stick with the topic? We're going to do definitely another show on the subject of your interest, and you'll be on the top of the list. But right now we're discussing Israel versus the Arab nationhood. And Iran, by the way, is not an Arab country. a reminder, so go ahead, please.
If you're going to shout me down, I'll
No,
just
no,
step
this
off
is not
the set,
shouting.
because you asked a
I'm
question.
just preventing
What
you
was the
from digressing
what was
from the
liberation
topic,
movement?
because we've gathered some
I'm
people
not
here
digressing.
to
Let
address
me go-
the topic.
Let me go back to your question. Your question
Please
was,
do
what
so.
is the impact of the liberation movement going on through these countries? I answered it. End of answer.
So the end of your answer is that Israel does not need to be fearful of what's happening simply because you have failed to see any placard bearing any slogan which denounces Israeli atrocities. Is that your justification? Because according
No,
to
that's
some
not what I
Israeli
said.
senior and
That's not what I
high-ranking
said.
Israeli officials, not necessarily military ones, this is something of great concern. So I was wondering whether or not you might have an
I
analysis
just
for this
said,
concern.
I did, and you misstated what I said. I said the Israelis
not.
and every
General
country in the
Petraeus
region
thought
that
have
was a
good
concern,
reason to
and
be
the
concerned.
Go ahead, New York. Finish your statement, please. Go ahead, quickly.
I said, what I said, you're quite correct. Israel has every reason to be concerned, and so does every other capital in the region.
And my simple question to you, sir, is why is Israel, or why should Israel be concerned?
They're not necessarily democratic movements. Some of those movements will go more towards a Sharia state than what Israel thinks of as democracy.
We're not discussing
it can
the
go
end
anyway.
result,
I'm
are we?
not
We're discussing the
forecasting that.
process. The process seems to be fairly democratic by all international standards.
We don't know what movements are going on. There's been no analysis on which tribal breakdowns there are, which political parties have what level of prominence. We just have popular unrest. Popular unrest is anarchy. It is not democracy.
Okay, to Gaza, 280, do you subscribe to this notion? And let's forget about Israel for the moment, just a theoretical notion that these popular uprisings in Tunisia, in Egypt and Libya, where all the world media are agreeing on the fact that these are the people democratically rising up to their dictators, being supported by the U.S., and this is even the American official stance, that this is a popular and a true people's movement. Do you subscribe to the notion put forward by New York that this is simply sheer anarchy?
No, not at all, because I've read an awful lot of the writings, and I've heard an awful lot of the leaders of the different groups involved, and it's a huge variety of groups, and it's a massive call for democracy. I mean, this is what has been so consistent throughout all of the local organisers, the smaller organisers. There has been many statements made, many many statements and proposals put forward for a intermediary way in which we can now choose the future administrations to organise and put in democratic structures. This is actually quite advanced.
We need
in the
to
way it's
head
been
into the
presented.
break for a recap of the hour's top stories, but stay where you are.